You're working on a book on the Arabian Nights.
Yes.
Students would be interested in hearing, I'm sure, what you're working on.
Yes, of course. I'm very interested in how do we add these stories, right? As I said before, the scribes were adding stories. Translators added stories. I don't think they did so entirely on their own. Perhaps the received wisdom about Antoine Galland, the first translator of the Arabian Nights in Europe, is that he is a real literary author of the Thousand and One Nights. Yes, he had interesting material, but a lot of scholars of French literature give him credit for lending sophistication and finesse to this material. And in that view of things, the summaries that were provided to him by a Syrian traveler named Hana Diab were merely raw material, which he expanded but also improved upon in making the sort of middle literature work into canonical literature.
So he used summaries provided to him, and then he turned them into full-blown tales.
Yes, Galland had this moment of despair when he ran out of Arabian Nights stories in his Arabic manuscript. And he desperately needed more Arabian Nights stories. There are these legends that Parisians would throw rocks at his window on the second floor, So he would go out to the balcony and tell the people below more stories from the Arabian Nights. But he had a financial need to keep telling stories. He had found his way back into society, into the academy, by publishing these translations from the Thousand and One Nights. And when he ran out of Arabic stories, he was looking at the apartment of a friend of his, Paul Lucas, a voyager, also an antiquarian like Galland, interested in precious coins and objects from the Middle East. He found perhaps the most precious object of all. Paul Lucas was fond of showing off as artifacts these young men he would bring back from the Middle East. And there was a young man named Hana Diab, a Syrian Christian Maronite from Aleppo. Immediately, Galland sensed the storytelling prowess of Hana Diab, and he invited him to share some Arabian Nights stories with him, and Diab was only so happy to oblige. And Diab is the man who told the stories of Aladdin and Ali Baba and the Adventures of Prince Ahmad and the Fairy Banu. These are the stories that have inspired European and Bollywood cinema, for that matter, for so long, and they all come from these stories. Sessions not unlike this one, where the conversations really were, where Galland would whip out his diary and jot down in a shorthand, struggling to keep up with Hana. Hana would keep, here's the story of Ali Baba, and there's Galland. You go and look at his diary at the Bibliothèque Nationale in Paris, and you can follow blow by blow, with the cross-outs and the et ceteras and the ellipses, this sort of dynamic process of listening to this performance of oral storytelling by Hana Diab.
So you're tracking down these hidden sources, or not source, transmitters that many of the Western translators used.
And I think by doing so, I'm also showing that they are at least co-authors, and in some cases, probably the original authors of some of these famous tales. A good example is Ali Baba and the 40 Thieves. The title itself already suggests its history, that those were two stories that were separate, that somebody shoved together. Well, as it happens, no folklore scholar in 300 years has found a version of this complete tale prior to Hana Diab's telling to Galland. Yes, we have the Magic Mountain and Open Sesame. Yes, there are separate stories with a clever slave girl who outwits the villain. Yes, there are stories of the 40 Thieves, or Thieves and the Captain. But Hana was the first one to weave these together into the story that we now know as Ali Baba and the 40 Thieves. And Galland, yes, expanded or changed things, but he didn't necessarily originate them as literature in the way that perhaps we've been long known to assume.
It seems like the theme that many of these reflections on the Thousand and Nights have in common, this weaving together, that there are scribes who pick and choose and weave together, and here even individual stories are woven together by these storytellers from other bits of stories. So it's almost like there's the sea of stories, as one Indian story collection is called, and as Rushdie calls his explicit response to the Arabian Nights, a sea of stories, and then you have different people swimming within it, grabbing pieces and putting them together in different ways.
Yes, very much so. And for many writers like A.S. Byatt or Salman Rushdie, the very multiplicity of these stories, the inexhaustibility of the stories, is what makes them such a powerful symbol of hope. A.S. Byatt loves to quote these stories about storytellers in concentration camps telling these stories to affirm hope in the worst possible of contexts. Byatt also just loves to think of these stories as uncontainable. You can try, but the frame tale never quite encompasses them, and that's often how I teach these tales. A frame tale often ends with a figure of authority reasserting his authority. For example, the Caliph Harun al-Rashid in disguise, going out in the streets and finding out about injustices, but at the end he's supposed to reveal himself and bring justice and restore things. That's a frame, but how poorly that frame seems to address the transgressions that occurred in the embedded tales, which deal with adultery, orgies, and jinn stealing brides away from their husbands, and husbands trying to sleep with jinnia, with female genies, and somehow the moral at the end, which perhaps a scribe, was trying to dress up his material or try and make it conform to
control it a little bit.
Control it. I think there's a wonderful tension there. It is very reassuring of a sort of inability of power to contain everything.